My name is Ed Dennis. I was born in October 23rd, 1940. I was born in the city of Rock Island, Illinois, in St. Anthony's Hospital. And grew up in a little town called Andalusia. About 10 miles outside of Rock Island. The house that we lived in Andalusia, we had always been told, I don't know for a fact, but we had been told it was a converted chicken coop, literally. It was probably 36 feet long by 20 feet wide, single story, no basement, no attic, made out of pretty flimsy material. It was a very cold house in the winter. We used to get ice on the insides of our windows in our bedrooms because our source of heat was just an oil stove that sat in the middle of the living room floor. And you would fill that with a 5-gallon can a couple times a day. We didn't have running water. We didn't have indoor plumbing of any kind. We walked outside to an outhouse, winter and summer. Our water, we walked out to a well, we hung a bucket on the well, we pumped the bucket full, we brought it in the house and set it on the counter next to the sink. But none of us knew that we were poor. None of us knew that we didn't have what we were told nowadays we're supposed to have. We made our own games, we played outside until dark, and when it got dark we would usually sit around and tell ghost stories or something and try and scare ourselves, and then go in and go to bed and wait for the sun to come up again and repeat the whole process. It was very much, I would say, a Mark Twain life, living on the Mississippi River. All of us kids ran barefoot, except during the school year. And we played a lot on the river. We had trot lines, and we went fishing, and a lot of swimming. Got in as few fights as I could, but growing up as a boy, you can't avoid all of them. And, oh, did I mention I was a Scorpio? Well, if you know anything about Scorpio kids, you don't cross them. Another one of the highlights of growing up was when my mom and dad were still together. We would go off to Danville, Illinois to visit my dad's parents, which was my grandpa and grandma on my dad's side. And of course they doted on me, and they doted on my little sister as well, because we only got to see them maybe 2 or 3 times a year. My grandfather never owned a car and never learned to drive. However, he was an engineer on the railroad, and he drove trains every day for a living. So when we would get there, my dad would take me with him, and we would go down to the depot and pick Grandpa up when he got off work. And when we did, we would always go to the roundhouse, what they call the roundhouse. And when these trains come in, they were these huge steam behemoths. I mean, they were just, you know, to a 5 or 6-year-old kid, they were just monsters. And anyway, my grandpa used to let me get up on the engine with him, and then he would have to take the engine out to what they call the turntable. And the turntable is where they would turn the whole train around and start it back in the other direction again. Then he would bring that back into the depot and bleed off the excess steam, which sound like dragons roaring to me. But a great experience. Growing up that way to me was a wonderful life. I've lived in the big cities and I've lived in the country, and I much prefer the country. And living in Andalusia, we all walked to school, of course. There were no school buses. That was not too far, though, about 1.5 miles to school. It was a one-room schoolhouse. We had one teacher for all 8 grades. We averaged between 15 and 18 kids per year. Usually that consisted of about 3 or 4 families. Everybody had several kids in it at the same time. When I got to be in about the 6th grade, they consolidated the school district, and then I walked another 1.5 miles, but in the opposite direction of home to the little town of Andalusia, where I went to a really big school. It probably had 75 kids. And from there I graduated 8th grade. And in those days you went from 8th grade directly to high school. And moved into Rock Island, Illinois for a couple of years during that time, 9th and 10th grade, which is when my mom and dad separated and divorced. Then we moved back to Andalusia, Illinois, to the same property in the same house. And I went my last 2 years of high school at Rock Ridge. Graduating from Rock Ridge in 1959.